In October 2024, something appeared on Tubi that made 2 million people stop scrolling. For over 40 years, this footage stayed hidden in studio vaults. The network called it too emotional to broadcast. Red had turned his final performance into a confession booth. He spoke directly to the camera like it was his therapist. He revealed family tragedies, career lies, and personal failures. Viewers said it felt like reading someone's diary. The question is, why did they finally decide to release it? Red Skelton was born on July 18, 1913, in a cramped shack in Vincennes, Indiana, just 2 months after his father died from heart failure at age 37. His father had been a clown in the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, but the joy he brought to others never reached his own home. After his death, Red's mother was left alone to raise 4 boys with nothing but grit. They lost their small store and were forced to rely on neighbors and kindness just to survive. Red wore ragged clothes, went to bed hungry, and carried the weight of being the poorest kid in school. But he learned early that a well-timed laugh could soften anything. He made humor his shield, not to impress, but to survive. That hunger stayed with him, shaping not only his face, but his voice, his timing, his truth. At 7, Red stood on street corners selling newspapers for 3 cents. He cracked jokes to boost his sales, sometimes sang, sometimes swept, sometimes begged. By 10, he was already juggling jobs, delivering ice, carrying cigars, scrubbing laundry, walking long miles just to bring home a few coins. He saw mothers pawn their wedding rings to buy bread. He saw kids go to school without shoes. His own schooling was scattered, squeezed between shifts and setbacks. But every minute spent laughing with strangers was a lesson he remembered. He became known around town not for grades, but for the way he could make a man with a broken back laugh like a child. At age 10, he ran away with a medicine show. He joined Doc R.E. Lewis and spent his summer hawking bottles of fake Pure-Alls for $10 a week. He slept in barns and wagons, barely ate, but sent every dollar back to his mother. One night, he slipped off the stage and smashed a case of glass. The crowd laughed. Red realized then that even mistakes could be magic, if you let them. He stayed with the medicine show for 4 years, picking up tricks, gags, accents, juggling, pantomime, tools that would follow him forever. He learned to be poor without bitterness, to perform without applause, and to laugh without reason. He never met his father. Only stories remained. They painted a man with grease paint and exhaustion, a man who collapsed too soon from a life that took more than it gave. But Red clung to those stories like scripture. In every circus tent he passed, in every dressing room mirror he stared into, he searched for a father he never touched. When the nights were cold and the laughter gone, that ache remained. He once said his comedy was just a way to bring back what was missing at home. That wound shaped everything he did. At 15, he dropped out of school. He had $1.35 in his pocket and a vague promise from a burlesque comic in Chicago. Hitchhiking out of Vincennes, he took with him a suitcase, a dream, and the memory of his mother's quiet nod. She never stopped him. She understood that some kids run toward something because they've already seen what it means to be left behind. Red took any gig he could, from circuses to nightclubs, back rooms to sidewalks. He worked through the Great Depression like a man racing a clock. By 16, he was touring with the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, the same one his father once walked. He didn't just belong under the big top, he breathed it in, the sawdust, the sweat, the fear, the silence before a punchline landed. That's where Red became more than funny. That's where he became real. He joined a silent vaudeville act called The Merry Mutes as a drummer. At just 16, Red wasn't allowed to speak on stage. Instead, he mimed, danced, squinted, slipped, and fell. He copied animals. He copied actors. He copied pain. He got paid $5 a week, but what he learned was worth more. He discovered the power of silence, of a look, of a stumble. His face became a map of everything he couldn't say as a child. He knew how to make people feel without needing a single word. By 1931, he and Bud Jones added words to their act. Red did impressions of Clark Gable that made crowds roar. They were pulling in $75 a week, unheard of during the Depression. But then Bud cheated, and the act fell apart. Red was crushed. He lost not just a job, but a rhythm. He took gigs at dance marathons, walkathons, anything. It was heartbreak on stage and off. But in the ruins of that breakup, he met Edna Stillwell, an usher at a theater who could write a punchline sharper than most men on radio. They married in 1934. She was 13. He was 21. But Edna had a mind for business and a pen for comedy. Together, they created Guzzler's Gin, a sketch about a drunk hiding his booze from his wife. The crowds couldn't get enough. Chicago clubs started calling. That sketch became the gateway. Edna booked gigs, wrote material, and pushed Red harder than anyone ever had. They grossed $2,000 a week by 1937. The Chicago Civic Opera House packed out just to see his rubber-faced falls and Edna's fiery setups. But behind the curtain, their marriage started to break. The more Red rose, the more their bond cracked under pressure. In 1937, Red took a gamble and joined a radio show called The Avalon Time. He invented a slow-talking country bumpkin named Clem Cadiddlehopper. That one character changed everything. Audiences loved him. The ratings shot up by 30%. By 1938, stores were selling Cadiddlehopper merch. Kids copied his lines. Parents laughed along. He had built something America needed: humor without cruelty, innocence without stupidity. A character who made you feel safe and silly all at once. In 1941, Red got his own show on NBC. It was called The Red Skelton Show and reached 20 million listeners a week. It was only 15 minutes per episode, but he stuffed each one with multiple voices, characters, routines. Willie Lump Lump, Junior the Mean Whittle Kid, sketch after sketch. People couldn't get enough. But all that success came at a price. Red worked non-stop. He wrote, he performed, he rewrote, he worried. Until one night in 1943, during a live broadcast, he collapsed. He thought he heard his father's voice saying, "Keep going." He couldn't breathe, couldn't stand. He was pulled off stage, and the show stopped. Doctors said it was exhaustion. Red called it the worst moment of his life. But when he came back, his comedy was darker, deeper. There was something in his voice now that wasn't there before. One of his most famous routines became the Mean Whittle Kid, a brat with a sharp tongue and a slapstick edge. Audiences howled, but not everyone laughed. The FCC started sending warnings. Parents complained. It was too violent, too crude. But Red didn't care. He believed comedy should show the truth, even when it was messy, even when it made you uncomfortable. The controversy only grew his fame. Kids quoted the sketches. Adults whispered complaints. But no one turned off the radio. By 1944, Red was earning $10,000 a week. That was movie star money. That was mansion money. But Red had a weakness. He gambled. One night in Las Vegas, he lost $50,000 in a single sitting. That was everything he had. Gone. He sat at the table, hollow-eyed, no jokes left. Friends tried to help. Edna tried to reason. But Red kept chasing the same thrill he got from laughter, risk, luck, timing. It took him years to dig out of that hole. His fame was still rising, but his bank account was a warning to every comedian that applause doesn't pay the bills if you don't know when to walk away. Red Skelton's rise at MGM started quietly in 1940, but it didn't stay quiet for long. A talent scout from the studio had seen him perform his signature routines on the radio, and they signed him without blinking. His first movie role, in Flight Command, didn't make much noise, but when he showed up in Dr. Kildare's Wedding Day in 1941, everything changed. In just 2 days, he shot a pantomime drunk scene that made the entire movie feel like his. Lou Ayres, the actual star, later said Red stole the picture. The audiences didn't just laugh, they kept coming back. MGM saw it instantly. They started putting him in anything they could, betting that even a weak script could work if Skelton was in the cast. He'd crossed from radio into film, and within a year, he wasn't just surviving at MGM. He was one of the biggest names on their lot. By 1943, Red was given his own full-blown comedy lead in Whistling in Brooklyn, and the box office didn't hesitate. The film made $2.5 million back then, which would be over $40 million today. He played a detective who also loved baseball, and that blend, sports, mystery, and clowning, felt like it had been made just for him. What audiences didn't know was that some of the gags used stop-motion effects, which were rare in that era. A Disney technician had even been brought in to help him time the movements. The mix of Skelton's physical rhythm and these new visual tricks gave the film moments no one forgot. And just like that, Red wasn't only MGM's clown. He was one of their most inventive stars. But just a year later, while making Bathing Beauty in 1944, Skelton got news that changed him forever. His infant son, Richard, had leukemia. He told no one at the studio. On camera, he was the same old Red. Off camera, crew members sometimes found him weeping in corners, alone. He pushed through filming. The movie was a hit, but the grief didn't leave him. Richard passed away in 1958 at just 9 years old. Red said it changed everything. His work turned more reflective. He started focusing on charity. He began giving more attention to children's hospitals. The clown who made people laugh was carrying something deep behind those eyes, something that would never leave him. In 1948, The Fuller Brush Man came out and sold over 15 million tickets around the world. It should have been the peak of his film career. His character, a clumsy but lovable door-to-door salesman, made people laugh so hard theaters had to replay scenes just to let the laughter settle. But Red wasn't celebrating. MGM had him under a tight contract. They worked him through illness, through grief, through everything. He said later, they never gave him space to breathe. The laughter on screen was real, but behind it was someone being driven past his limits. His personal pain was hidden behind ticket sales, deadlines, and contracts. By 1950, he was nominated for a Golden Globe for The Yellow Cab Man. It felt like recognition, but behind that was another battle. He wanted to write his own material, shape his own characters. MGM didn't want that. They wanted him obedient. In 1951, he refused to take a role. The studio suspended him. Newspapers ran with it. This was a time when actors didn't fight studios. But Red did. He said he didn't want to be just a clown. He wanted respect as an artist. The stand he took marked a shift in how stars were treated. His name was big enough to challenge the system. And it worked. Then came television. On September 30th, 1951, The Red Skelton Show premiered to about 30 million viewers. That first night had everything: mime sketches, soldier jokes, live music. People couldn't believe it was all live. It was one of the first shows broadcast coast to coast using a new coaxial cable system. The next year, he won 2 Emmys. CBS tried to tone him down, saying his comedy was too visual, but the audience didn't care. The show became a weekly tradition. It wasn't just a show, it was an event. In 1952, a little character named Freddie the Freeloader appeared. A homeless tramp with a limp, a grin, and a heart. Red gave him warmth, said he was inspired by someone he met while down and out in Chicago. Freddie didn't speak much, but people loved him. They saw hope in him. By 1953, the character was more famous than some movie stars. Freddie proved that a hobo with good timing could win over a nation that was used to polished comedy. But in 1957, Red's life cracked open. His wife Edna, who was also his manager, confessed she'd been having an affair with his producer. Red snapped. He punched a hotel wall, broke his hand, missed 2 episodes. The press turned it into a scandal. Fans were shocked. Red had always seemed like the family man. Within months, he remarried. But the damage was done. His image had shifted. The show dipped for a while, but didn't collapse. The audience still wanted their weekly laugh, even if they knew the man behind it was hurting. In 1958, Red introduced another character, George Appleby, the henpecked husband. He got huge ratings, up to 40 million viewers some nights. George was a sad sack dealing with smog, nagging, and a world that didn't listen. It was all played for laughs, but underneath there was truth. Skelton's voice began to give out from years of smoking, so he leaned harder into pantomime. Less talking, more doing. His physical comedy sharpened. It wasn't a weakness. It became the reason people watched. In 1962, he moved his show to CBS and won an Emmy for writing. He mocked the suburbs, mocked himself, mocked the world. But the network wanted more edge. Jokes about divorce, politics. Skelton resisted. He wasn't a rebel comic. He wanted laughs, not controversy. But he tried. His sketches began to walk a tighter line between silly and serious. That Emmy wasn't just a trophy. It marked a turn in his voice. He was still the clown, but now he had something to say. By 1965, he hit a peak. 50 million people watched each week. John Wayne came on to boost ratings. Skelton did Western spoofs, brought back old routines, but the audience wanted color TV. He resisted at first, thinking it was a gimmick. Eventually, he gave in. That same year, he aired a retrospective with Wayne and his most famous sketches. The scrapbook episode became one of his most watched. He was on top again, even as new comedians with louder voices were rising behind him. In 1969, CBS decided it was time to move on. Skelton's show was still doing well, but the network wanted to chase youth culture. They replaced him with edgy variety shows. Red moved to NBC for one final season. His last show aired May 19, 1971. At the end, he said goodbye softly. The laughter faded, but not the love. That last broadcast wasn't just a goodbye to a show, it was the end of an era. 2 years later, in 1973, the IRS came calling. He owed $1.2 million in back taxes, bad investments, bad management. At age 60, he had to sell his Palm Springs estate. He hit the road again, doing live shows in casinos to pay off the debt. He played to crowds who remembered the old days. The glamour was gone, but the work wasn't. His fight to stay afloat made headlines. Behind the painted smile, he was grinding. Then, in 1976, he staged a comeback. NBC gave him a few specials under the title Funny Faces. He brought back Clem Cadiddlehopper, updated the sketches. They sold well in syndication, pulling in $500,000 and helping him get back on his feet. The old routines still worked. The audience still laughed. Clem still had it. After his second wife, Georgia, died that same year, Red turned to painting. He made over 500 oil portraits, most of them of his characters. In 1980, he held an exhibit in Las Vegas. He sold 200 paintings for $5,000 each. The gallery was packed. It wasn't just about the money. Painting was how he grieved, how he stayed alive. People saw the same heart in his art that they had seen on their screens. But in 1981, things wobbled again. While headlining at the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, Red collapsed backstage after a show. He had relapsed into drinking. Nearly died that night. Friends were scared. The stage had once been his medicine, but now it was exhausting him. Still, he came back again. Not because he had to, because he couldn't not perform. Later that year, he filmed Freddie the Freeloader's Christmas Dinner for HBO. It aired December 13, 1981, with Vincent Price and Imogene Coca. The story was simple. Freddie just wanted to share a meal with a friend. The special only cost $200,000 to make, but 5 million people watched. It was quiet, sweet, and full of heart. Just like him. In 1982, he did More Funny Faces with French mime legend Marcel Marceau. They performed a 30-minute duel of silent gags. Just before it was filmed, vandals had destroyed Richard's grave. Red didn't say much, but the pain was there. On stage, he didn't miss a beat. He mimed, smiled, and made the audience forget. That's what he'd always done. Then came Funny Faces 3 in 1983. That year, Skelton revealed something few people knew. In June 1944, he had enlisted and performed for soldiers in Europe for 18 months. He did shows during blackouts, brought laughter to bomb shelters, broadcasted on Armed Forces radio. No one had known. He'd kept it private. But now it came out, and people saw the clown in a new light. He wasn't just funny. He had served quietly. That same year, on July 18th, he performed at Royal Albert Hall in London for Queen Elizabeth II. It was his 70th birthday. He told stories, did sketches, and even drummed in honor of his late father. It was filmed for HBO and aired in 1984. It cost the usual $200,000. But the laughter that night filled the hall like it always had. Royalty laughed with the rest of us. Each of his farewell specials cost about $200,000 and reached around 5 million viewers. They were filmed in Toronto and aired on HBO. Simple productions. Huge heart. Freddie the Freeloader's Christmas Dinner and A Royal Command performance stood out most. Red Skelton's life was built on laughter, but behind the red nose and painted smile was a man who knew more about heartbreak than most would ever guess. In 1957, when he divorced Edna Marie Stilwell, the headlines barely scratched the surface. She wasn't just his wife. She had been his manager, his writer, his compass. Their daughter Valentina was only 10 when she became the center of a storm neither parent could control. Edna accused Red of being distant. Red said Edna turned their daughter against him. The court chose Edna. Red wept in open court. Some days he showed up in clown makeup, trying to remind the world that he still existed as a father. It was written off as a publicity stunt, but it wasn't. It was the only way he knew how to speak through the noise. Just months later, in May 1958, his 9-year-old son Richard was diagnosed with leukemia. There was nothing doctors could do. Red and his wife Georgia held vigil at UCLA Medical Center as Richard's body weakened. On May 10th, just days before his 10th birthday, the boy died. Red canceled his show. Johnny Carson took over his spot on TV. Off camera, Red stopped talking. By 1961, grief swallowed him whole. He tried to take his own life with sleeping pills. Doctors brought him back, but the part of him that danced freely never really returned. From that moment, he turned all his sorrow into purpose. He built the Red Skelton Classic Learning Center in 1963, trying to give other children what he had lost. In 1963, he married Lothian Toland. Whispers of betrayal followed them through the decade. In 1971, the marriage ended. Red was left alone again. Then came Georgia Davis in 1973, and for a moment, life warmed up. But cancer took her in 1976. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't appear in public. For almost 3 years, Red barely left his house. No stage, no spotlight, no punchline, just silence and shadow. On January 17, 1986, Red's car slammed into another vehicle in Palm Desert. He was 73, and his body broke in 12 places. Ribs cracked, his leg shattered, his face bruised and swollen. He stayed in the hospital for weeks. Surgeries followed. He made jokes to the press, but privately, he was afraid it was over. He couldn't walk for months. He couldn't work. He quietly slipped away from public life, not in bitterness, but in quiet retreat. By 1990, doctors told him his lungs were failing. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Too many cigarettes, too many decades. He quit on the spot. He said it was the hardest thing he ever did. In his final years, he painted obsessively. More than 50,000 pieces. He sold them, gave the money to children's hospitals, let the art speak where he couldn't. On September 17, 1997, Red Skelton died. But even then, he wasn't finished. In 1986, Lucille Ball stood before a crowd in Pasadena and handed Red the Governor's Award at the 38th Primetime Emmys. It had been 16 years since his show was canceled, but nobody had forgotten him. That same year, he received an honorary degree from Ball State University. In 1987, a Screen Actors Guild Award followed. His name was carved back into the conversation. A generation who'd grown up with him came rushing back. They remembered the voice, the face, the sadness behind the smile. By 1989, interest was rising again. 3 missing episodes of The Red Skelton Show were unearthed. In 1990, 16 more were added to a VHS collection called The Lost Episodes. They came from private collectors, old station vaults, places no one had looked for decades. These weren't just reruns. They were moments people thought were lost forever. Red's routines, once grainy and silent, were now alive again. In 2013, over 200 hours of unaired kinescopes surfaced in Indiana. They weren't the kind of clips you'd expect. These were sketches censored in the 1950s, routines about racism and civil rights that never aired. Skelton had written them, fought for them, then stored them when networks said no. Decades later, they reappeared, showing the world a version of Red that didn't just juggle or mime, but questioned and pushed. These reels became part of the Edna and Red Skelton collection. They were raw, political, human. His art also refused to disappear. By 2020, paintings of Freddie the Freeloader were selling for as much as $1 million. The tramp he used to play on TV had become a fine art subject. Skelton started painting in the 1960s, and by the end of his life, he was said to have earned more from art than television. The Skelton estate donated over 1,000 works to museums. A $4 million gallery was built at the Red Skelton Museum. What once hung in his study now hung in exhibits. The man who painted to survive grief had somehow painted himself into legacy. In 2024, the Paley Center for Media revealed something else, a collection of outtakes and bloopers from his final TV episode in 1971. It aired on August 1st of that year, closing a 20-year run on CBS. But this unseen footage showed something more intimate. Behind-the-scenes laughter with Carol Burnett. Missed lines. A crew cracking up. Red caught off guard in the middle of emotion. It was the kind of footage he never thought would air. It became the heart of upcoming retrospectives. And then came the most haunting release of all. In October 2024, Tubi streamed Red Skelton, the Farewell Specials, Uncensored Edition. It drew more than 2 million viewers in its first week. These were clips from his 1981-1982 season. Most of it had never aired. One scene, a 45-minute version of Freddy the Freeloader's Christmas Dinner, revealed deleted material from Skelton's own tapes. It wasn't just acting. Red was crying. Monologues flowed where script